In some earlier exercises, there are a number of exercises here, I talk about using an online free image editor, which is fine, but to some degree you get what you pay for, which it's good, but it's not fantastic. However, you may have access to Photoshop, which would be great, or maybe you have access to GIMP, which is a downloadable free photo editor. In any case, Photoshop is very common, although you could do much of this work that we talk about with many other kinds of image editors. So I'm going to do a very short tutorial on the 3 image creation altering things that we do in this class using Photoshop. Now I'm using Photoshop CC 2015, which is probably pretty similar to the other Photoshop CCs, which is the newer versions. However, Photoshop's been through so many generations. And if you're talking about the CS versions from 2015, 2016, CS was quite different. So these instructions may or may not apply. Hey, by the way, I'm not a Photoshop expert. So if you know Photoshop and you want to do some of these things your own way, that's fine too. These are just accessory, additional instructions. But remember, you still should watch the videos that directly apply to these exercises that are also listed here in the class. So the 3 times that we use the photo or image editing and image creation stuff is image exercise 1, essentially resizing images. When we make in the backgrounds, we make opacity based background image. So I'm going to mention that too. And then when we do the banner. So let's start with the image exercise 1. In that exercise, you've got these 2 images. One of them is this gymnastics image right here, and the other one is the baseball image. And with the first one, with the gymnastics one, the idea is, what if we just want to size it down for the web, size it properly for the web? And I suggested that you're going to make a full and a thumbnail, and the full for a vertical is 375 pixels wide by 500 deep. But we're not going to be worried about the depth so much, we're just going to set the width. Well, I think the best tool for doing that in Photoshop is it's called Save for Web. And it's under the File menu, Export, Save for Web. It's an older piece of the software. It's still fantastic because it allows you both to change the size of something, and it does lots of other work to really slim it down for the web, make it work great for the web. When you first open it up, you may not see the whole image. I can do Control-0, Control- to try to show things better. Control-0 for the whole thing, stuff like that. Let's look in this whole area. Depending on how your settings are when you open it up, it may not be under JPEG, maybe under something else, but do change it to JPEG high. JPEG high is good, and the quality, I'll even go up to 80 or 100 even if you want, doesn't matter really, something like that. These choices are fine. Optimized, convert, yes. Monitor count, those are all fine. Metadata, we don't really have to have it, we'll leave it there. Here's the key idea right here, image size, because we're not cropping, we're just sizing. The width I told you for the full size for the vertical is 375, which is a lot smaller, and you'll see now it brings the height down to 545, which is just fine because in this case we're keeping the crop, we're just setting the width, which is very common. One thing I like about Save for Web is that it forces you to save a copy. That's another good thing about it. So I'm going to click on Save, and when I do, it makes it look a lot smaller, but that's what we expect. And then it's going to say, hey, here's where do you want to put it? And again, I remember I said we're going to put this in the full, and this one's going to be called, I have some others here already, so I'm just going to call it Photoshop P-Shop Full Gym, and save it here. Good. It was remarkably smaller. And then, of course, if I want to go on to do the thumbnail, which at the vertical size would be 75 wide, I can just continue along. I don't have to do anything else. Just go Save to Web, change that one thing, and continue along. Okay, but what if I want to crop? Well, I think of that as a two-step process. I will use the cropping tool, which is right here, and it's clicked on right now. Right? It starts with this, gives me a little outline, and I want to make sure I see the whole photo when I do. Under this pull down for where it says ratio, I like to use width and height and resolution. Because our resolution we like to set at the same time. And 72 is good, 500 is good for a horizontal in this case, and 375 is also. And you'll see the box that is shown now is a somewhat different proportion than the actual photo. And here's where we would grab a hold, and we're actually grabbing a hold of the photo beneath the box and move it around to get what we want. Or we could grab the corner and size it in further, something like that, or not. I'm gonna go to about this spot right here. I'm gonna accept the crop by double clicking, and yes, it gets smaller, but we would expect it would get smaller. It's kind of set the resolution and everything at the same time. We could just save it now, but I still like to go to export, save to web, save for web, because it actually does even more stuff to make it smaller. But we don't have to change anything here because we've already set our height and width. So I'm just going to do that as a save. And again, I'll call this P-Shop full B-ball and save it, and it's gotten remarkably smaller. And of course, then you could just, now having already done the crop, you could simply just go to Save for Web to make the changes to size it down even further for the thumbnail view. Okay, so that's going to be the end of the image 1 portion if you were using Photoshop. And now we'll go on to making the opacity-based background image in Photoshop for the background image exercise, which is later on. Okay, so now let's say later on you want to make one of these opacity-based background image pieces. So this is additional information. You should still watch the regular assignment. So I'm in Photoshop. So if this is assuming you want to use Photoshop to do this. And I've gone File, New File, and I can give it a name if I want to. I could say background. At this point, custom is fine. And here's the numbers that I used in the earlier exercise. I just like making these things square because I think that tiles around nicely. So I made it 400 pixels by 400 pixels, resolution 72. The color mode is fine. Background contents, this is important. Make this transparent. And then these down here, you can leave them alone, doesn't matter. So just say OK. So I've got this square little transparent block area, right? So I'm going to grab the text tool way down here, the text tool. And when I select it, it's already selected. I also went through and found an interesting, stylish kind of font. And I changed this to really big. I made it 400 points. And actually, I'm also making it white. The color is white. That I'm going to type in. And if you want to make this that kind of a background, semi-transparent, whitish thing, then that's what you would do. I'm going to put my cursor down here someplace and just click in here, and it's going to be enormous. I'm going to make an ampersand. It's a big ampersand. You know, it's never going to go quite to the right place. So don't worry about that, because I'm just going to go to Image, Free Transform. Now I can move it around wherever I want. I'm going to stick it up here in the corner a little bit. I'm going to use the Free Transform tool to just stretch it out to fill the entire box. Good. And I can double click in there to accept the transformation. But that's just plain white now. That would just come out as just plain white. But I want it to be white, but only partly transparent, right? Mostly transparent. So I'm going to go to the layers. I only have one layer. And in that layer, I'm going to change the opacity. I'm going to change the opacity. And look at your instructions on the earlier assignment. I think I changed it to something like 20%. Now, it may seem to disappear, but if you look carefully, maybe not in this recording, but on your own screen, you'll see it hasn't really disappeared at all. It's just a very faint, mostly transparent white thing now. It's going to look nice tiled as a background image. And then you would do a save as. And here's where you're going to have to change it not to a Photoshop PDF, but you want to save a PSD. A PNG. A PNG is your choice. And go stick it in your folder and continue like that, and then bring it on your web page. And use the other instructions for that. Okay, I'm not going to actually do this save. For now, I'm going to move on to the last time when we need to use this kind of program in this class. And finally, what if you want to use Photoshop to create a banner on your site? for your name, or maybe with your name and some other artwork and some color behind it and so on. Well, in the instructions, again, I use the Pixlr online process, and that's fine, but resolution isn't that great. Photoshop, of course, does a much better job, but you could use InDesign or Illustrator or anything else you know. But I'm going to do it here with Photoshop CC. Let's go File, New. And this is you'll see that these are the sizes I use in the other instructions for Pixlr. And transparent again, 960, 150. We can give it a name, I call it. Whoa. Banner Jack, something like that. Say OK. All right, so I'm going to go to the Type tool. And I already have it set at 100. And again, I've chosen an interesting font. Right now, I'm in some strangish color. I'm going to make it more of the reddish, purpley-ish. That's pretty ugly. Ooh. Maybe more like that, more like real red. I'm going to make it relatively dark, too. The background's going to be lighter. So I click in here to type. I'm going to make it all caps, put my name. Okay, good, but I want to fill up the whole space. Well, I'm just going to go right to Free Transform. I can move it around in the right place. I can stretch it out. It's still editable. It's a pretty good tool. I'm going to mostly fill the box with my name. And I'll double click in here to accept the transformation. And right now I could just go File, Save As. Oops, or File Save, whatever. It's first save. And I don't want a PFD. I want a PNG to preserve my transparency. First I could have added a shadow, drop shadow, or so on, and put it where I want to, and throw it on the web page. But now let's imagine instead I want to continue, and I want to do a gradient background. So I'm going to go to my Layers panel and make a new layer. There it is. It's another active layer. I'm going to go over to and choose a rectangle. Close that up. And the rectangle, I'm going to roughly draw over the whole area. It'll take it over. And of course, it's all red now. That's not very helpful, but don't worry about that. But now this Properties tool will allow me to make it the true size, 960. So I could have tried to draw it perfectly, but why bother? I could just go here and make that 0 and 0 for the X and the Y. In other words, the starting points. It's going to completely cover and fill the area. Good. So I'm going to go to my gradient tool, but what happens if I try to click in here? It says, no, I can't do it. Okay. That is because what I find is to make a layer editable in this way, I've got to go to Layer, Rasterize, Shape. Now it is editable. Okay, I'm going to choose my two ends of my gradient. I don't like that red. My first end of the gradient, I'm going to make it more of a lighter, well, maybe a lavender. Try that. And the second end is going to be this green. So I set my two ends of my gradient right here. And now with my gradient tool, I can just start drawing. Depending on how far I draw or what direction I draw will determine the gradient. Oops, I want a regular linear gradient. So I'm going to draw a gradient like that. And I'll say that's good. It's kind of Easter colors. I like that. Go to my Layers panel again and move my name up to the top. And now my name is on top of that layer. And now I could again do a File, Save As, make sure it's a PNG, and continue along with the exercise as described earlier. Hope that helps you if you want to work in Photoshop. Again, I'm not a Photoshop expert. If you know more about Photoshop than I do, and you may very easily, then you know how to do this and do more if you want to create your own banner. Remember, the idea of a banner is I want some special type that I can't depend on the user having on their computer. Yet I don't want to go to the trouble of a web font and be stuck with Google's fonts, for instance. I want to make it into an image and have complete control of exactly the appearance. And that's one reason to use to create an art type banner. However, remember, it is an image, and because you're loading up an image, it will be slightly slower.